Jack Harrison's world is crumbling. The bank wants his family farm, the crops are failing, and he's down to his last dollar. But everything changes one stormy night when a small plane crashes in his wheat field. The injured pilot he rescues isn't just another stranded traveler. She's someone who will turn his simple life upside down. When she returns days later in a private jet, Jack learns that the woman he sheltered harbors an extraordinary secret that could save everything he holds dear. But with two people from such different worlds, can love really conquer all? Could this chance encounter be the miracle they both needed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Kansas sky in shades of amber as Jack Harrison's weathered boots crunched across the parched earth of his family farm. In his palm, cool and familiar, rested his great-grandfather's pocket watch, the last Harrison family heirloom he hadn't yet pawned to keep the bank at bay. The watch's gold case was dulled with age, its face scratched from generations of hard work, but it still kept perfect time. Just like his father had taught him, Jack wound it every morning before sunrise, a ritual that felt more like prayer than habit these days. "Still ticking," he muttered, running his thumb over the initials etched on the back. T.H. Thomas Harrison, the man who'd first broken this ground in 1902. Back then, the soil had been rich and dark, promising abundance to anyone willing to work hard enough. Now, after years of drought and changing weather patterns, that same soil crumbled like ash between his fingers. The farm's lone tractor, a 20-year-old machine held together with spare parts and determination, coughed to life on the third try. Jack had been meaning to get it serviced, but every spare dollar went to seeds, fuel, or another payment on the mounting pile of debt that threatened to swallow the farm whole. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another call from the bank, no doubt. He let it ring. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and no amount of early harassment would change what he had to say, or rather, what he didn't have to say. 3 missed payments, a failed winter wheat crop, and now the spring planting looking just as grim. The numbers didn't lie, no matter how many times he recalculated them late into the night. The morning sun climbed higher as Jack made his rounds, checking irrigation lines that hadn't seen proper water pressure in weeks. The small herd of cattle his father had been so proud of was down to just 6 head, grazing listlessly on the sparse remaining grass. He'd sold the rest, piece by piece, watching his heritage dissolve into just enough cash to keep going another month, another week, another day. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, where his mother's floral curtains still hung faded but clean at the windows, Jack studied the papers spread across the table. Loan documents, bank statements, weather reports, and crop projections all told the same story. The Harrison farm, 4 generations strong, was dying. Modern agribusiness and climate change were reshaping the landscape, and small family farms like his were becoming as extinct as the buffalo that once roamed these plains. The pocket watch ticked steadily in his hand as he picked up his father's old leather wallet. Behind his driver's license, he kept a photograph from better times. His parents standing proud in front of fields of wheat that stretched to the horizon, golden and full of promise. His father's last words echoed in his memory. "The land never betrays those who love it, son, remember that." But love wasn't enough anymore. Not in a world where corporations could buy up thousands of acres and work them with machines that cost more than his entire farm was worth. Not when the rain came too late, or not at all, and the wind carried away a little more topsoil each year. At precisely 9:45, Jack slipped the pocket watch into his jacket, straightened his one good tie, and climbed into his truck. The drive into town was 15 minutes of familiar landmarks and fading memories. The old Miller place, sold off 5 years ago and now standing empty. The Thompson farm, transformed into a solar panel field. The rusted sign welcoming visitors to Millbrook, population dwindling. The local bank hadn't changed since he was a boy, except now instead of Mr. Peterson, who'd known every farmer by name and childhood nickname, he'd be meeting with Brandon Wells, a fresh-faced loan officer who'd probably never worked a day of his life outside an air-conditioned office. As Jack parked his truck, the first few drops of an unexpected storm began to fall. He checked the watch one last time, 9:58. Right on schedule for what felt like the last act of the Harrison farming legacy. Unless some miracle dropped out of the sky, by this time tomorrow he'd be just another statistic in the death of the American family farm. Little did he know, a miracle was indeed about to fall from the sky. But first, he had to survive the most humiliating meeting of his life. The bank meeting went exactly as Jack had expected. Brandon Wells, in his crisp blue suit and polished shoes, had delivered the news with practiced sympathy. 60 days, Mr. Harrison. That's the best I can do. He'd slid a worn leather journal. Across the desk, Jack's father's farm ledger, filled with 30 years of careful records. Maybe it's time to consider other options. Now, back at the farm, Jack sat in the kitchen, studying the last entry in his father's precise handwriting. Remember, son, every storm brings change. Sometimes destruction, sometimes salvation. A farmer's job is to be ready for both. The wind had picked up significantly during his drive home, carrying with it the electric promise of a major storm. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, transforming the afternoon sky into an ominous canvas of greys and purples. The weather radio crackled with warnings of an approaching system, possible tornadic activity, high winds, and heavy rainfall. Jack moved with practiced efficiency, securing anything that could become a projectile. The remaining cattle needed to be moved to the shelter of the old barn, and the tractor had to be parked under cover. Each gust of wind carried dust, and the sweet smell of rain, the first real precipitation they'd had in weeks, coming too late to save this season's crops. As he worked, his mind wandered to the many storms he'd weathered in his 35 years on this land. The tornado of '98 that took the old silo, the flash flood of 2012 that nearly drowned half his herd, the drought of 2019 that marked the beginning of their serious financial troubles. Each disaster had left its mark, but the farm had survived, until now. Lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Jack glanced at his father's pocket watch, 5:47 p.m. The storm was directly overhead, rain now falling in heavy sheets that turned the parched earth into a slick mess of mud and failed promises. That's when he heard it, the distinctive sound of a small aircraft engine struggling against the wind. Through gaps in the clouds, he caught glimpses of navigation lights, the plane clearly fighting to maintain altitude. No pilot in their right mind would be flying in these conditions, especially not in something that sounded smaller than a crop duster. The aircraft emerged from the cloud cover, flying dangerously low. In the fading daylight, Jack could make out its sleek shape, definitely not a local farm plane. It was something more sophisticated, but clearly in trouble. The engine's rhythm faltered, caught, then faltered again. "Come on," Jack muttered, watching the pilot's desperate attempt to keep the craft airborne. "There's a small airfield 20 miles east. You can make it." But the storm had other plans. A massive gust of wind caught the plane's tail, sending it into a dangerous spin. The engine gave one final roar of protest before cutting out completely. For a moment, the aircraft seemed to hang in the air, defying gravity. Then it dropped, disappearing behind the tree line that marked the edge of his eastern field. The impact came seconds later, a sickening crunch of metal and wood that Jack felt in his bones. Without hesitation, he grabbed his emergency kit from beneath the kitchen sink and his heavy-duty flashlight. The storm raged around him as he ran toward his truck, but he barely noticed the rain and wind. Someone was out there, probably hurt, possibly dying. The nearest emergency services were at least 30 minutes away, and that was in good weather. "Hold on," he whispered. though whether to the unknown pilot or himself, he wasn't sure. The truck's tires spun in the mud before finding purchase, and he headed toward the crash site, guided by instinct and the occasional flash of lightning. His headlights caught a streak of broken trees and scattered debris. The plane had carved a path through his failed wheat crop before coming to rest. Against an old oak tree, smoke rose from the engine despite the rain, and the fuselage was crumpled but largely intact, a small mercy. As Jack approached the wreckage, movement caught his eye. The pilot's door creaked open, and a figure emerged, unsteady but alive. Lightning flashed again, illuminating a face that would change everything. A woman probably in her early 30s, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Her flight suit bore an insignia he didn't recognize, and her eyes, when they met, his, showed both pain and an unexpected clarity. "Well," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady, "this isn't exactly how I planned to make my entrance." Then her legs gave way, and Jack lunged forward to catch her before she hit the ground. The woman was lighter than she looked, but far from helpless. Even as Jack supported her weight, she maintained a grip on a sleek flight helmet tucked under her arm. The helmet was clearly expensive, its surface adorned with sophisticated instruments, and the initials SW painted in elegant silver script. "I can walk," she insisted, though her unsteady legs suggested otherwise. "Just got my bell rung a bit." "Ma'am, you've just survived a plane crash," Jack said, leading her toward his truck. "Let's not push our luck." Rain pelted them both as lightning continued to fracture the sky. The storm was intensifying, and they needed to get clear of the wreckage. "Sarah," she corrected, her voice carrying a hint of authority despite her condition. "Sarah Wellington. And you are?" "Jack Harrison. This is my farm you crashed on." He helped her into the passenger seat, noticing how she winced when she moved her right shoulder. Though given current circumstances, the bank might argue that point. A flash of lightning illuminated the wreckage behind them. The plane was a high-end model, definitely not local. Its tail number started with a sequence Jack recognized from his brief stint taking flying lessons years ago. It was a private aircraft, not a rental. "We need to secure the plane," Sarah said, trying to rise again. "There's sensitive—" "What we need is to get you looked at," Jack interrupted, gently but firmly pushing her back into the seat. "The plane's not going anywhere. In this weather." He circled to the driver's side, but not before grabbing his emergency medical kit from the truck bed. Inside the cabin, the dome light revealed more details about his unexpected guest. Her flight suit was custom-made, the fabric and stitching far too fine for standard issue. The cut on her forehead was still bleeding, but her eyes remained sharp and alert, taking in every detail of her surroundings. "The nearest hospital's about 40 minutes away," Jack said, pulling out gauze and antiseptic. "But in this weather, it might as well be on the moon. Let me at least clean that cut." Sarah submitted to his first aid attempts with surprising patience, though her gaze kept drifting to the wreckage visible through the rain-streaked windshield. "Your farm," she said suddenly. "You mentioned the bank." "Not really your concern right now," Jack replied, focusing on the cut. "It was deep enough to need attention, but probably wouldn't require stitches." "Hold still." She did, but her mind was clearly working. "Foreclosure?" Jack's hands paused briefly before continuing their work. "Like I said, not your problem." "There. That should—" A violent gust of wind rocked the truck, carrying with it the sound of tearing metal. They both turned to see a section of the plane's wing finally give way, crashing into the muddy field. "Insurance will cover the damage to your property," Sarah said quickly. "I'll make sure of it." Jack actually laughed at that, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Ma'am, Sarah, a broken plane in my failed wheat field is pretty low on my list of concerns right now." He pulled out his phone, unsurprised to find no signal. The storm was playing havoc with the already spotty rural coverage. Sarah winced again as she shifted in her seat, and Jack noticed she was still clutching the helmet. Its surface displayed readings he didn't recognize, and what looked like a built-in heads-up display system. "That's some serious equipment," he commented, starting the truck. "Military? Private sector," she replied smoothly, too smoothly, though I'm not really at liberty to discuss the details. The drive back to the farmhouse was slow and treacherous, the truck's headlights barely penetrating the wall of rain. Jack kept one eye on the road and one on his passenger, noting how she maintained perfect posture despite her obvious discomfort. There was something about her that didn't quite add up. Private plane, high-tech gear, and an air of authority that seemed at odds with her relative youth. "You're lucky," he said as they finally pulled up to the house. "Another few hundred yards, and you'd have hit the old grain silo instead of that oak tree." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Sarah murmured, so quietly he almost missed it over. "The storm. I chose exactly where to put her down." Before Jack could process that statement, another flash of lightning illuminated the farmhouse. For a moment, through the rain-blurred windows, it looked almost prosperous again, like it had in his childhood. Then darkness returned, and with it the reality of his situation. "It's not much," he said unnecessarily, "but it's dry, and I've got a first aid kit that's a bit better stocked than this one." Sarah turned to him, her expression unreadable. In the dim light, "Mr. Harrison, I have a feeling it's exactly what I've been looking for." The farmhouse kitchen felt different with a stranger in it. Jack moved through the familiar space, gathering supplies by the light of battery-powered lanterns after the storm had predictably knocked out the power. From a cedar chest in the living room, he retrieved his grandmother's quilt, a well-preserved wedding gift she'd made herself, each patch telling a story of the family's history. "Here," he said, draping it around Sarah's shoulders as she sat at the kitchen table. "You're shivering." She accepted the quilt with a grateful nod, pulling it close. The handmade covering seemed to soften her somehow, making her look less like a mysterious crash survivor and more like a real person. "It's beautiful," she said, fingers tracing the intricate stitching. "Family heirloom?" "My grandmother's. She made one for each of her children when they married." Jack busied himself with the first aid kit, laying out fresh gauze and antiseptic. "Though at the rate things are going, this one might end up in a yard sale next month." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly at that, but she said nothing as Jack cleaned her cut more thoroughly in the better light. The bleeding had mostly stopped, though a bruise was beginning to form around it. Her shoulder, upon closer inspection, was badly bruised, but not dislocated. "You've done this before," she observed as he worked. "Farm accidents happen. You learn to patch things up until you can get proper help." He noticed her watching him with an intensity that seemed excessive. "For basic first aid, speaking of which, as soon as the storm passes—" "I'm fine," she interrupted firmly. "Nothing's broken, and I've had worse." The statement raised more questions than it answered, but Jack let it pass. Instead, he put on a pot of coffee using the camping stove he kept for emergencies. The familiar ritual gave him something to focus on besides his strange guest and the increasingly complicated situation. Thunder rolled overhead, and Sarah pulled the quilt tighter. "Your family's been here a long time," she said. It wasn't quite a question. 4 generations. Jack poured 2 cups of coffee, setting one before her. "Started with my great-grandfather, Thomas Harrison. Built this house himself in 1902. And now the bank wants to take it." Jack sat down across from her, studying her over his coffee cup. "You seem awfully interested in my financial troubles, for someone who just fell out of the sky." A slight smile touched her lips. "Professional habit. I notice things." She took a sip of coffee, then added, "Especially things that might be worth investing in." Before Jack could respond to that cryptic statement, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows. Sarah tensed, her hand automatically reaching for the flight helmet she'd placed on the table beside her. "That's not standard equipment," Jack said, nodding toward the helmet. "Neither was that plane." "No," she agreed. They weren't. She turned the helmet slightly, and Jack caught a glimpse of what looked like corporate insignia beneath the initials. "But as I said, I'm not really at liberty to discuss the details." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the storm rage outside. The old house creaked and groaned, but held steady as it had for over a century. Sarah's gaze wandered around the kitchen, taking in the well-worn furniture, the faded curtains, the family photos on the walls. "You know," she said finally, "there's something to be said for places with history, real history, not the kind you can buy or manufacture." She met his eyes. "It would be a shame to lose that." "A lot of things would be a shame," Jack replied. "Doesn't change the reality of the situation." Sarah set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Reality is more flexible than most people think, Mr. Harrison. Sometimes all it takes is a different perspective, a new approach." There was something in her tone that made Jack look at her more closely. Despite her injuries and bedraggled appearance, she carried herself with an unmistakable air of authority, someone used to making things happen. "Why do I get the feeling you're not just talking about farming?" Lightning flashed again, illuminating her face. For a moment, she looked like she might say more, but then she simply pulled the quilt tighter and smiled. "Let's just say I recognize potential when I see it." Outside, the storm began to ease, but Jack had a feeling the real tempest was yet to come. Dawn arrived with the gentle clarity that often follows violent storms. Jack found Sarah already awake, standing on the front porch with his grandmother's quilt still wrapped around her shoulders. She held something in her hands, an old Polaroid camera she must have found on the bookshelf, where it had sat untouched since his father's passing. "Hope you don't mind," she said, turning the camera over carefully. "I haven't seen one of these in years." "Dad never trusted digital," Jack replied, joining her at the porch railing. "Said you couldn't hold a memory in your hand if it was just pixels on a screen." The morning sun painted everything in soft gold, revealing the storm's impact. Scattered branches littered the yard, and the old oak tree had lost a few limbs, but the farmhouse stood undamaged. In the distance, Sarah's crumpled plane caught the light like a fallen silver bird. Without warning, Sarah raised the camera and snapped a photo. The familiar whir and click transported Jack back to countless childhood mornings, his father documenting each season's changes. The instant photo emerged, and Sarah shook it gently, watching the image develop. "Beautiful light," she murmured, studying the picture. "The way it hits the fields, even with the damage, there's something almost sacred about it." Jack glanced at her sharply, surprised to hear his own thoughts echoed by this stranger. Before he could respond, a distant lowing reminded him of his responsibilities. "Cattle need feeding," he said. "You should rest. Let that head wound." "I'll help." She handed him the photo, a surprisingly artistic shot of the farmhouse silhouetted against the morning sky. "I'm not made of glass, Mr. Harrison." He wanted to argue, but there was something in her stance that suggested it would be pointless. Instead, he led her to the barn, watching with growing curiosity as she shed the quilt and rolled up her sleeves without hesitation. Sarah approached the work with the same intensity she'd shown discussing his financial troubles. She asked intelligent questions about feed ratios and breeding schedules, documented everything with the Polaroid, and showed no aversion to getting her hands dirty. Her flight suit, clearly expensive, was soon covered in dust and hay. "You've done this before," Jack said, echoing her words from the night before. Sarah paused in her documentation of the barn's ancient support beams. "Spent summers on my grandfather's ranch in Montana," she replied, "before it was sold to a golf course developer." Something flickered across her face. Regret, maybe, or determination. Some things shouldn't be lost just because they're not profitable enough. The morning passed in a rhythm of shared work and comfortable silence, broken occasionally by the whir of the Polaroid. Sarah seemed to find beauty in the most unexpected places. The rust pattern on an old tractor, the way sunlight filtered through gaps in the barn boards, the texture of weathered wood against blue sky. "You know," she said as they finished the morning chores, "most people would see all this as a liability, outdated equipment, aging structures, manual processes." "Most people would be right," Jack admitted. "Can't compete with corporate farms and their automated systems. Unless," Sarah trailed off, studying another photo as it developed, What if that's exactly what makes this place valuable? The authenticity, the history, the human touch. She gestured at the growing collection of Polaroids spread out on a hay bale. Look at these images. They tell a story you can't replicate with modern efficiency. There was an eagerness in her voice that made Jack uneasy. Sarah, what exactly do you... The distant sound of an approaching helicopter cut him off. Sarah's expression shifted instantly, professional mask sliding back into place. She gathered the photos quickly but carefully. That's my ride, she said, straightening her dirty flight suit with dignity. Thank you for the hospitality, Mr. Harrison. And the perspective. She held out her hand. You'll be hearing from me soon. Before Jack could process this abrupt shift, she was striding toward the house to collect her helmet and personal items. He watched her go, still holding the first photo she'd taken of his farm in the morning light. Only then did he notice what she'd captured in the background, not just the sunrise, but the faint trace of a rainbow arcing over his struggling fields. Like his father always said, every storm brings change. A week passed, like a blur of routine and resignation. Jack spent his days working the farm, trying not to think about Sarah Wellington or the strange morning they'd shared. The wreckage of her plane had been efficiently removed by a team that arrived hours after her departure, leaving nothing but crushed wheat and tire tracks as evidence she'd ever been there. He found one of her Polaroids tucked into the feed barrel, a simple shot of sunlight streaming through the barn doors. On the back, in elegant handwriting, "Perspective matters." He kept it in his shirt pocket, though he couldn't have said exactly why. The bank's deadline loomed closer. Brandon Wells called twice, his voice carrying that particular tone of professional sympathy that made Jack's jaw clench. The forecast promised another dry spell, and the remaining cattle were looking thinner by the day. Then came the jet. Jack was repairing fence posts when he heard it, the distinctive sound of turbine engines cutting through the morning quiet. He looked up to see a sleek Gulfstream G650 circling his property, far larger and more impressive than Sarah's crashed aircraft. Its pristine white surface gleamed in the sunlight as it made a perfect landing on the flat stretch of field that had once grown corn. He stood frozen, fence post forgotten in his hands, as the jet's door opened and a familiar figure emerged. Sarah Wellington descended the aircraft's stairs with practiced grace, though this was a very different Sarah than the one who'd crashed in his wheat field. Gone was the flight suit, replaced by a tailored business suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage. Her hair was elegantly styled, and a pair of designer sunglasses shielded her eyes from the Kansas sun. She wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits followed her, carrying tablets and looking distinctly uncomfortable about the dust coating their Italian leather shoes. But it was the small item in Sarah's hand that caught Jack's attention. A business card held between perfectly manicured fingers. "Mr. Harrison," she called out, striding toward him with the confidence of someone used to commanding rooms much larger than a Kansas field. "I believe I promised you'd hear from me soon." Jack looked from her to the jet and back again. Most people would have just called. A smile tugged at her lips. "I'm not most people." She held out the business card. "Sarah Wellington, CEO of Wellington Industries. We should talk about your farm's future." The card was heavy, made of premium stock with raised silver lettering. Wellington Industries, one of the largest agricultural technology companies in the world. Jack had read about them in farming magazines, their innovations in sustainable agriculture, and their controversial buyouts of struggling family farms. "You could have mentioned this last week," he said, not taking the card. "Would you have treated me the same if I had?" She gestured to the farmhouse. "Shall we discuss this somewhere more comfortable? My team has prepared a proposal I think you'll find interesting." Jack studied her face, searching for traces of the woman who'd helped him feed cattle and taken Polaroids of his barn. She was still there, behind the corporate polish, but now surrounded by layers of power and purpose he couldn't begin to fathom. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Why this farm?" Sarah removed her sunglasses, and her eyes were as intense as he remembered. Because, Mr. Harrison, sometimes the things most worth saving are the things others have written off as obsolete. She pulled something from her suit jacket, the Polaroid of his farmhouse at dawn. Your father was right about digital pictures. You can't hold a memory in your hand if it's just pixels on a screen. Some things need to be preserved, not just recorded. The two men in suits shifted impatiently, but Sarah didn't seem to notice. She was looking past Jack at the farmhouse, the barn, the fields stretching to the horizon. I'm not here to buy you out, she said quietly. I'm here to offer you a partnership, one that could change everything, not just for this farm, but for every family farm fighting to survive in a changing world. Jack looked down at the business card still held out between them. His father's watch ticked in his pocket, marking the moment when everything could change. Behind him lay generations of tradition and struggle. Ahead, something unknown, but full of possibility. The thing about perspective, Sarah added, and now he could hear a hint of the woman who'd sat wrapped in his grandmother's quilt, is that sometimes you need to fall out of the sky to find the right one. Jack took the card. The kitchen table had never held such incongruous items. A sleek laptop displaying complex financial projections next to a worn farm-to-table cookbook that had belonged to Jack's mother. Sarah sat at the table in her expensive suit, paging through the cookbook with genuine interest while her team waited in the jet. Your mother's notes are fascinating, she said, fingering a page stained with ancient butter marks. These modifications to traditional recipes, she was adapting to changing conditions while maintaining the essence of the original dishes. Mom always said farming was like cooking. You follow your instincts as much as the recipe. Jack watched her from the counter where he was making coffee the old-fashioned way, refusing to be intimidated by her corporate presence. Exactly! Sarah's eyes lit up. That's what I've been trying to explain to my board. We've been approaching agricultural sustainability all wrong. It's not about replacing traditional methods entirely, it's about enhancing them. She stood up, moving to examine the kitchen with new eyes. This cookbook, it's not just recipes, it's a record of adaptation. Every substitution, every adjustment, it's a lesson in sustainability. Jack brought over 2 coffee mugs, the ceramic chipped, but well-loved. You're talking about more than just cooking. What if, Sarah said, accepting the coffee without hesitation despite its humble presentation, we could combine your family's generations of farming wisdom with cutting-edge agricultural technology? Not to replace the human element, but to support it? Outside, the jet gleamed in the morning sun, a symbol of the modern world parked incongruously amid fields that had been worked by horse and plough within living memory. The contrast should have been jarring, but somehow it felt right, like 2 pieces of a puzzle finally finding their fit. Your team probably thinks you're crazy, Jack said, nodding toward the jet. CEO of Wellington Industries, getting excited about an old cookbook in a failing farm's kitchen. Sarah's laugh was unexpected and genuine. My team thinks I've been crazy since I crashed a plane in your wheat field. She paused, then added more softly, though that might have been the sanest thing I've done in years. Their eyes met over their coffee cups, and for a moment the gulf between their worlds seemed to narrow. Sarah still had that intensity he remembered from the storm, but now he understood its source. The same drive that had taken a ranch girl from Montana and turned her into a corporate powerhouse. Show me, she said suddenly, closing the cookbook. Show me everything about this farm that the spreadsheets can't capture. They spent the next hours walking the property, Sarah asking questions that revealed both her corporate acumen and her forgotten ranch roots. She wanted to know about water patterns, soil composition, generations of crop rotation decisions. But she also stopped to listen to bird songs, ran her hands along weathered fence posts, and insisted on helping Jack fix a stuck gate, despite her expensive suit. You know, Jack said as they worked, most CEOs would have sent a team of consultants to evaluate the property. Sarah tightened a bolt with surprising skill. Most CEOs didn't spend their childhood learning that the health of the land is something you feel in your bones. She straightened up, brushing dust from her hands. Besides, I think we both know this is about more than just business evaluation. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Before Jack could respond, Sarah's phone chimed. Her team, no doubt wondering why their CEO was doing manual labor in a Kansas field. "I should go," she said, but made no move to leave. "There are meetings, calls, a board to convince, but I keep thinking about that Polaroid. The one of your farmhouse at dawn." She met his eyes directly. "Some things need to be preserved, Jack. Not just the land or the buildings, but the knowledge, the connection, the way of life. I think we could do that together." She reached into her suit jacket and pulled out a folded paper, preliminary. Partnership terms that would save the farm, while revolutionizing how Wellington Industries approached agricultural preservation. "Take your time reviewing it," she said, holding out the document. "But know that whatever you decide about the business proposal, I'm not done learning about this place, or the person who loves it enough to fight for it." Their fingers brushed as he took the paper, and neither pulled away immediately. Above them, a meadowlark sang, its melody bridging the space between ancient fields and modern ambitions, between a farmer's calloused hands and a CEO's manicured ones. Sarah's business plan sat on Jack's kitchen table for 3 days before he could bring himself to open it. The elegant Wellington Industries folder contained not just financial projections, but a complete vision for transforming Harrison Farm into something entirely new while preserving its core identity. "Heritage Agricultural Innovation Center," read the cover page in bold letters. Beneath it, in Sarah's handwriting, "Where tradition meets tomorrow." The proposal was unlike anything Jack had expected. Instead of a corporate takeover, Sarah envisioned a partnership that would turn the farm into a living laboratory for sustainable agriculture. Traditional farming methods would be enhanced by cutting-edge technology, not replaced by it. The Harrison family would retain ownership and operational control, with Wellington Industries providing capital, technology, and market access. "It's not charity," Sarah explained over the phone when he finally called her. "It's innovation. Your family's 4 generations of farming knowledge is worth more than any algorithm we could develop." Jack spread the documents across the table where his father had once counted seeds and calculated crop yields. The financial projections were staggering, numbers that could not only save the farm, but transform it into something his great-grandfather could never have imagined. "You want to use our crop rotation records to develop AI prediction models," he said, reading from one section. "Our soil management techniques to create new sustainable farming protocols. Your family has been documenting climate adaptation strategies for over a century without realizing it," Sarah replied. "Those handwritten journals in your office, they're worth their weight in gold to our research department." The plan went beyond mere preservation. Sarah wanted to establish education programs, bringing in young farmers to learn both traditional methods and modern innovations. The old barn would become a conference center, hosting workshops on sustainable agriculture. Even his mother's cookbook would play a role, its recipes and notes forming the basis for a study on agricultural adaptation over time. "What about the day-to-day farming?" he asked, voicing his deepest concern. "I won't become some corporate showpiece, Sarah. This is still a working farm." "Read page 12, she said softly. He turned to the section titled Operational Structure. The farm would continue its normal operations, but with enhanced technology and resources. Jack would oversee both traditional farming and innovation programs, his practical experience guiding the integration of new methods. "You're not just preserving a farm," Sarah continued. "You're creating a model for how family farms can survive and thrive in the modern world. Everything that makes Harrison Farm special, the history, the knowledge, the connection to the land, becomes its greatest asset." Jack thought about his father's words in the farm journal. "Remember, son, Every storm brings change. He looked out the window at fields that had supported his family for generations. Fields that could now support a whole new generation of farmers, learning to blend the wisdom of the past with the possibilities of the future. "There's one thing not addressed in the proposal," he said finally. "Oh, you. Where do you fit into all this, Sarah? Is this just another corporate project for you?" The pause on the other end of the line felt heavy with unspoken possibilities. "I think we both know it's more than that," she answered finally. "But right now, I need you to evaluate this as a business decision. The rest we can figure out along the way." Jack picked up the photo she'd taken that first morning. His farmhouse silhouetted against the dawn, the rainbow arcing over his fields. She'd seen possibility here when all he could see was failure. Now she was offering him a chance to transform that possibility into reality. "If I say yes," he said, "I need one condition added to the agreement." "Name it." "You personally oversee the project, not your team, you. I need someone who understands both worlds." Another pause, shorter this time. "I was hoping you'd say that." He could hear the smile in her voice. "I've already had my office start house hunting in the area. After all, a CEO should stay close to her investments." Jack looked down at the business plan, his father's watch ticking steadily in his pocket. Sometimes, he realized, saving something meant letting it grow into something new. The arrival of the first piece of Wellington technology marked the beginning of real change at Harrison Farm. The sleek farming equipment manual looked out of place on Jack's weathered desk, its glossy pages filled with diagrams of soil sensors and automated irrigation systems that seemed to belong in a science fiction novel rather than a Kansas farm. "Think of it as giving the land a voice," Sarah explained, standing beside him in the field as technicians installed the first sensors. She'd been true to her word about overseeing the project personally, splitting her time between corporate headquarters and the farm. Today, she wore practical boots with her business attire, having learned from experience that Kansas soil showed no respect for designer shoes. "The sensors will tell us exactly what the soil needs, but we'll use your family's methods to provide it," she continued. "It's like having 100 years of farming experience backed by real-time data." Jack watched as his ancient tractor was fitted with a GPS guidance system and soil monitoring equipment. The contrast should have been jarring, but somehow it worked. Like seeing an old friend dressed up for a special occasion, different but still familiar. "Dad would have loved this," he admitted, surprising himself with the observation. "He always said farmers were the original scientists. We just didn't have the fancy equipment to prove our theories." Sarah smiled, pulling out her tablet to show him the first data readings. "Look at this. The soil composition in your north field, your father's notes about it being temperamental, are spot on. The sensors are showing exactly why." They stood shoulder to shoulder, examining the data. Sarah's presence had become increasingly familiar over the past weeks, her corporate efficiency softening into something more comfortable as she split her time between their two worlds. She still ran her company with precision, taking calls and video meetings from the farmhouse kitchen, but she also helped milk cows and learned to drive the tractor, insisting on understanding every aspect of the operation. The manual became their shared reference point, dog-eared and annotated, with both technical specifications and generations of farming wisdom. Sarah added her own notes in precise handwriting, creating a bridge between silicon chips and soil, between corporate boardrooms and farmhouse kitchens. "The education program starts next week," she reminded him, closing the manual. "First group of young farmers coming to learn the Harrison-Wellington method. Are you ready?" Jack looked across his fields, where modern sensors now lived harmoniously with techniques his great-grandfather had developed. The barn had been carefully renovated, its historic structure preserved, while the interior was transformed into a state-of-the-art classroom and conference facility. "Remember that first morning," he asked, "when you were taking Polaroids of everything?" "I was trying to capture what made this place special," she said. "The light, the history, the feeling of something authentic. And now, Sarah gestured, at the farm around them, the new irrigation system was nearly invisible, designed to preserve the landscape while maximizing efficiency. Solar panels blended seamlessly with the old outbuildings, providing power without disrupting the farm's character. Even the once failing wheat field where she'd crashed was thriving. A test plot for drought-resistant heritage grains developed using Harrison family seed stock. Now we're not just capturing it, she said. We're building on it. Every sensor, every data point, every new technique, they're all just tools to help this place become what it was always meant to be. A truck appeared on the horizon, carrying the last of the initial equipment shipment. Sarah checked her watch, a practical field model now, though Jack knew her designer pieces waited in the farmhouse for video calls with the board. I should go review the delivery, she said, but lingered. Dinner later, I found another of your mother's recipes I want to try. The invitation held layers of meaning neither of them was quite ready to address. Their worlds were merging, personally and professionally, with the same gradual certainty as the technology integrating into the ancient rhythms of the farm. I'll bring the wine, Jack said. From the cellar you insisted we add to the renovation. Sarah's laugh carried across the field as she walked away, her figure silhouetted against the same horizon that had witnessed generations of Harrisons fighting to keep their land alive. Now, instead of an ending, that horizon held the promise of a new beginning. The newspaper headlines appeared first in local papers, then spread like wildfire across national media. Billionaire CEO and Kansas farmer, a modern fairy tale, and love in the heartland, Wellington Industries, Sarah Wellington takes up residence near Rural Innovation Project. The articles, with their mix of business analysis and romantic speculation, lay scattered across the farmhouse kitchen table. I'm sorry about this, Sarah said, scanning one of the more sensational pieces, Beauty and the Farm Beast. Really? These journalists should be focusing on the agricultural innovation, not creating some romanticized narrative. Jack leaned against the counter, coffee cup in hand, trying to maintain his composure. The morning's peace had been shattered by calls from reporters, all wanting the inside scoop on their fairy tale romance. Even Brandon Wells from the bank had called, his tone dramatically different now that Harrison Farm was making national headlines. The board's concerned, Sarah continued, pushing aside another article. They think the personal angle is overshadowing the business objectives. They're worried about the company's image, about speculation that I'm making decisions based on personal factors. Are they wrong? Jack asked quietly. Sarah looked up sharply, their eyes meeting across the kitchen. The question hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said over the past months of working side by side, of shared dinners and late-night conversations about the future of farming. My feelings about you don't make this project any less valid, she finally said. The data speaks for itself. The Harrison-Wellington method is revolutionizing sustainable agriculture. The first group of student farmers is exceeding all expectations. As if to emphasize her point, they could hear voices from the barn-turned-classroom, where young agriculturists from across the country were learning to blend traditional wisdom with cutting-edge technology. The program had become so popular, they'd had to start a waiting list. The media attention could help, Jack suggested, though his tone betrayed his discomfort. Bring more attention to the cause of saving family farms, or it could turn this into a circus. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the fields where sensors now lived harmoniously with heritage farming methods. I've worked too hard to be taken seriously in this industry, to have everything reduced to a romance novel plot. Jack followed her gaze. The farm had transformed over the past months, becoming something that honored its past while embracing the future. But the changes weren't just physical. He'd watched Sarah slowly let down her corporate armor, seen her rediscover her ranching roots and embrace the rhythm of farm life. He'd found himself opening up to new possibilities, learning to trust that change didn't always mean loss. The sound of a helicopter broke their reflection. Sarah's shoulders tensed as she recognized the media logo on its side. "They're getting bolder," she muttered, pulling out her phone. "I'll have security." "No," Jack interrupted, making a decision. "Let them come." Sarah turned to him, surprised. "Jack, you're right. This isn't a fairy tale. It's better than that. It's about innovation, preservation, finding new ways to save things worth saving." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "So let them come. Let them see what we're really doing here. The board will see that their CEO hasn't lost her mind. She's created a model that could transform agricultural sustainability while preserving farming heritage." He paused, then added more softly, "And if they also see that somewhere along the way, two people from different worlds found something worth building together, well, that's just part of the story." Sarah's professional mask slipped just slightly, a smile tugging at her lips. "When did you get so good at corporate spin?" "I learned from the best. Besides," he nodded toward the barn where their students were gathered, "we're teaching the next generation that farming is about adaptation. Maybe it's time we showed them that applies to farmers too." The helicopter was circling lower now, and more vehicles were appearing on the horizon, reporters drawn by the promise of a good story. Sarah squared her shoulders, CEO instincts kicking in, but her hand found Jack's and squeezed it briefly. "All right," she said, "but we do this our way. Show them the technology, the education program, the real innovation happening here. Let them see that this isn't about a billionaire's whim or a romantic adventure. It's about finding new ways to preserve something essential." Jack looked down at their joined hands, her manicured fingers intertwined with his calloused ones. "And if they ask about us?" Sarah's answer was interrupted by the first reporter's car pulling up to the farm. But her eyes, when they met his, held both professional determination and personal promise. "We tell them the truth. Sometimes the best innovations come from unexpected connections." Sarah's private diary lay open on her temporary desk in the farmhouse office, its pages filled with an increasingly conflicted narrative. Unlike her corporate reports and public statements, here she allowed herself complete honesty about the growing complications of the Harrison-Wellington partnership. "The board doesn't understand," she'd written the night before. "They see numbers, projections, market analysis. They don't see how Jack's traditional methods make the technology work. Better, how his family's knowledge fills gaps that data alone could never bridge. They don't see him teaching our students things that no algorithm could calculate. They don't see—" The entry trailed off, interrupted by an urgent call from corporate headquarters. Now, in the harsh light of morning, Sarah faced the biggest crisis of the project yet. "They're threatening to pull the funding," she told Jack, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The board thinks we're moving too slowly, that we're too focused on preservation and not enough on scalable innovation. They want to implement full automation, reduce the educational component, and—" She hesitated. "And what?" Jack pressed, though his expression suggested he already knew. "They want to buy the farm outright, make it a fully corporate-owned research facility." Sarah couldn't meet his eyes. "They're calling our partnership model inefficient and emotionally compromised." Jack absorbed this in silence, his father's watch ticking steadily in his pocket. Outside, the morning class was starting in the barn, young farmers gathering to learn the very methods the board wanted to eliminate. "What do you think?" he finally asked. Sarah closed her diary, her fingers lingering on its leather cover. "I think they're wrong. Everything we've accomplished here, the sustainable irrigation systems, the heritage seed program, the integration of traditional and modern techniques, it all works because of the partnership, not in spite of it." "That's not what I asked." Jack's voice was gentle but firm. "What do you think, Sarah? Not as CEO of Wellington Industries, but as the woman who crashed in my wheat field and saw something worth saving." The question hit home. Sarah stood and walked to the window, watching the students gather around one of the older farmers from the community, learning techniques passed down through generations. The scene represented everything she'd dreamed of when she first proposed this project. Tradition and innovation working in harmony, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. But the board's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. The project was behind schedule in some areas, over budget in others. The media attention had died down, but investors were asking hard questions about return on investment and scalability. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'm tired of living in two worlds. The board wants me back at headquarters full-time. They say a CEO shouldn't be spending so much time in the field." She turned back to Jack. "They're not just questioning the project anymore. They're questioning my judgment." Jack crossed the room to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. And they might be right. The words hurt to say. "Look at me, Jack. I'm keeping my corporate clothes in a farmhouse closet, taking video calls between tractor lessons, trying to convince billionaire investors to believe in something they can't quantify in a spreadsheet. Maybe I am compromised." Compromised? Jack's laugh held no humor. "Sarah, you're the only one seeing clearly. You understand both sides, the necessity of innovation and the value of tradition. That's not compromise, that's vision." She wanted to believe him. The diary on her desk held months of observations proving him right. Detailed notes about how traditional farming wisdom enhanced their technological innovations, how the human element made their data more meaningful, how this small Kansas farm was creating a model that could revolutionize agricultural sustainability. But it also held other observations, ones she'd barely admitted to herself, about how peace felt more attainable here than in any corporate boardroom, about how Jack's quiet strength had become as essential to her as caffeine and spreadsheets, about how, somewhere between crashed planes and soil sensors, she'd found pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. "The board meets on Friday," she said. "They'll want an answer. About the project or about us?" Sarah felt the weight of both worlds pressing down on her. "I don't think those are separate questions anymore." As if to emphasize her point, her phone buzzed with another urgent message from corporate. At the same time, the sound of laughter drifted in from the barn, where the next generation of farmers was learning to bridge the gap between past and future. Two worlds, two paths, and one decision that would change everything. The broken family photo on the farmhouse floor said everything about how badly things had unraveled. The frame had fallen during their first real argument, cracking the glass over the image of Jack's parents standing proudly in front of their wheat fields. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. "You can't just walk away from this," Sarah said, her voice hoarse after hours of debate. The Wellington Industries board meeting had gone exactly as feared. And worse, the project is working. The data proves it. Data! Jack's laugh was bitter as he picked up the broken frame. "That's exactly the problem, Sarah. Everything comes down to data for them. For you." The accusation hung heavy in the air between them. "That's not fair." Sarah's corporate armor was back in place, but her eyes betrayed her hurt. "I've fought for this farm, for our vision. I've put my reputation, my position on the line, and now they're calling you back." Jack carefully removed the photo from its broken frame. "Back to your real world." The board's ultimatum had been clear. Either convert Harrison Farm into a fully automated research facility under complete corporate control, or lose funding entirely. Sarah's compromise proposals had been rejected one by one. Her passionate defense of their partnership model dismissed as emotional attachment, clouding business judgment. "It's just temporary," she insisted. 3 months at headquarters rebuilding. Trust with the board, showing them the long-term potential, while they send in their corporate teams to evaluate and streamline everything we've built. Jack shook his head. "You know what will happen? They'll dismantle the education program first. Too costly, not enough immediate return on investment. Then they'll phase out the traditional methods because they're not efficient enough for their spreadsheets." Sarah moved to touch his arm, but he stepped away, creating physical distance to match the emotional chasm opening between them. On her tablet, another urgent message from corporate demanded attention. She ignored it. "Jack, please, we knew this would be complicated. Merging two worlds was never going to be easy." "Merging?" He gestured around the farmhouse kitchen, where her designer laptop sat next to his mother's old coffee pot, where corporate reports mingled with farming almanacs. "Look around, Sarah. You've been living in both worlds. I've been watching you exhaust yourself trying to prove something to people who will never understand what makes this place special." The truth of his words hit home. Sarah had been running, herself ragged, trying to translate the soul of Harrison Farm into terms her board would understand. Every success they'd achieved, the innovative farming methods, the thriving education program, the promising research data, somehow wasn't enough to satisfy corporate expectations. "So that's it?" Her professional facade cracked slightly. "We just give up? Let them win?" "No." Jack's voice softened. "We accept that some things can't be reconciled. Your world, they measure success in quarterly profits and shareholder value. This?" He held up the photo of his parents. "This is measured in generations, in lives changed, in wisdom passed down." Sarah felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't they see that the combination is what makes it work? "Because they're not you." Jack set the photo carefully on the counter. "You're the only one who truly understands both sides. And now they're making you choose." The weight of that truth settled over them. Outside, the evening sun painted the fields in shades of gold, just like that first morning when Sarah had captured the farm's essence with an old Polaroid camera. Everything had seemed possible then. "I have to go," Sarah said finally, gathering her tablet and keys. The corporate car waited outside, ready to whisk her back to a world of boardrooms and balance sheets. "The board expects an answer by morning." Jack nodded but didn't speak. They both knew this was more than a temporary separation. It was a fundamental fracture in the foundation they'd built together. Sarah paused at the door, looking back at the man who had shown her a different way of measuring success. "For what it's worth, crashing in your wheat field was the best mistake I ever made." "Sarah," his voice stopped her, "whatever you decide, remember what you saw that first morning. Before the data, before the proposals. Remember why you wanted to save this place." She walked to her car without responding, her heels clicking against the gravel driveway. As she drove away, the broken family photo sat on the counter beside Jack's father's watch, time-worn symbols of a legacy that couldn't be quantified in any corporate presentation. In her rearview mirror, Harrison Farm slowly disappeared into the gathering darkness, taking with it dreams of bridging worlds that might have been too far apart all along. A stack of unopened letters sat on Sarah's desk at Wellington Industries headquarters, each bearing the Harrison Farm return address. Beside them, her tablet displayed declining participation rates in the farm's education program and concerning data from the automated systems that had been installed in her absence. Without the human element she and Jack had fostered, the numbers were starting to tell a story of failure. 3 weeks had passed since their argument, 3 weeks of corporate meetings where she defended a vision that felt increasingly hollow. Without Jack's practical wisdom to ground it, her office overlooking the city felt sterile now, its modern luxury a poor substitute for morning light streaming through farmhouse windows. "The latest projections, Ms. Wellington," her assistant said, placing another report on her desk. This one showed the board's proposed streamlining measures, cuts that would effectively end everything unique about their partnership with Harrison Farm. In Kansas, Jack faced his own version of rock bottom. The farm felt empty without Sarah's energy and insight. The remaining students went through their lessons, but the spark of innovation that had made the program special was fading. Even the high-tech equipment seemed to be performing below capacity, as if it too missed the harmony they'd created between old and new. He found himself in the barn late one evening, surrounded by the teaching materials they'd developed together. Sarah's precise handwriting filled the margins of technical manuals, her notes showing how seamlessly she'd learned to blend corporate expertise with farming practicality. Now those manuals gathered dust as the program returned to more conventional methods. "You're both being stubborn fools," said Ellen Thompson, one of the older farmers who'd been teaching traditional techniques in their program. She'd stopped by to drop off her resignation letter. This was never about choosing between two worlds. It was about creating a new one. Jack picked up a soil analysis report from the early days of their partnership. Sarah had excitedly shown him how the data validated farming instincts his family had developed over generations. "It's not that simple," he said. "Isn't it?" Ellen challenged. "That girl saw something worth saving here. Not just the farm, the whole way of life. And you saw something in her worth fighting for. But instead of fighting together, you're both retreating to your comfort zones." Back in her office, Sarah stared at the unopened letters. Each one represented a thread of connection she'd been too afraid to pull, fearing what might unravel. Her diary sat beside them, its recent entries, reading more like a corporate post-mortem than the passionate observations of earlier days. The latest board meeting had been particularly difficult. The Harrison Farm experiment, they now called it, dismissing months of groundbreaking work as a failed test case. They spoke of valuable lessons learned and refocusing on core business objectives, corporate euphemisms for abandoning innovation in favor of safer returns. Sarah pulled up the photo gallery on her tablet, images she hadn't looked at since leaving the farm. There was Jack teaching students about weather patterns, his generations of family knowledge adding depth to the technical data. Another showed their first successful integration of automated irrigation with traditional soil management techniques. In each photo, the profound potential of their partnership was evident. Her phone buzzed with another meeting reminder, more discussions about repositioning and damage control, the corporate world's answer to a dream they couldn't quantify. In the farm's kitchen, Jack made coffee in the expensive machine Sarah had insisted on installing. The familiar aroma only emphasized her absence. He looked out at the fields where they'd walked that first morning, when she'd seen possibility instead of failure. The morning's data readings from their sensor network showed concerning patterns. Without Sarah's expertise in interpreting and adjusting the technology, the innovative systems they'd developed were becoming just another layer of complexity rather than true solutions. A group of students gathered in the barn, their voices carrying across the yard. They were discussing the program's future, wondering if they should transfer to more conventional agricultural schools. The very thing Sarah had feared, the loss of their unique vision, was happening. Both Jack and Sarah, separated by miles but united in their sense of loss, faced the same reality. In trying to protect what they valued, they might have destroyed something even more precious. The question was, had they realized it too late? The hand-drawn farm plans spread across Sarah's corporate desk looked startlingly out of place among the sleek technology surrounding them. She'd spent the night sketching them, combining traditional farming layouts with innovative technology. Integration, not as separate systems, but as one harmonious whole. The drawings showed Harrison Farm as it could be, a true bridge between past and future. "Cancel my meetings," she told her assistant, rolling up the plans. "All of them. But the board presentation will have to wait." Sarah was already gathering her things. Sometimes you have to step back to see the whole picture. She'd spent weeks trying to translate their vision into corporate language, when what they really needed was a new vocabulary altogether. The plans in her hand weren't just technical drawings, they were a declaration of possibility. At Harrison Farm, Jack was reaching a similar revelation. He stood in the barn's classroom, where Ellen's words still echoed, creating a new world. The morning sun streamed through windows that had witnessed generations of farmers learning their trade. Now those same windows illuminated a unique blend of traditional tools and modern technology. He picked up one of Sarah's technical manuals, its margins filled with questions about traditional farming methods. She'd never simply accepted "that's how we've always done it" as an answer. She'd pushed him to articulate the wisdom behind the traditions, helping translate generations of instinct into teachable principles. The sound of a car on the gravel driveway pulled him from his thoughts. Through the barn door, he saw a familiar figure emerge from a rental car. Sarah, looking both corporate polished and farmland ready in boots beneath her business suit. They met in the space between barn and farmhouse, that middle ground that had always been their strength. "The board meeting," Jack started. "Can wait." Sarah unfurled her plans on the hood of her car. "Look at this." Really look. The drawings showed something new. Not a corporate takeover disguised as innovation, not a desperate preservation of the past, but a genuine evolution. Traditional field rotation patterns integrated with advanced soil monitoring, heritage farming methods enhanced by selective automation, education programs that drew equally from ancient wisdom and cutting-edge research. "It's not about choosing sides," Sarah said, her finger tracing the designs. "It's about building bridges. The board wants scalability? Fine. But we scale the whole system, the human knowledge, the traditional methods, everything that makes this place work." Jack studied the plans, seeing how she'd captured the essence of his family's farming philosophy while pushing it into the future. "They'll say it's too complicated, too dependent on things they can't control." Good. Sarah's eyes held that familiar intensity, because that's exactly what makes it valuable. We're not just preserving a farm or implementing technology. We're creating a new model for agricultural evolution. She pulled out her tablet, showing him data from other family farms facing similar challenges. "We're not alone. There's a whole network of farmers out there trying to bridge this gap. What if Harrison Farm became the proof that it's possible? Not just surviving, but showing others the way forward." Jack felt the spark of possibility rekindling. "The education program could expand," Sarah finished, "not just teaching farming techniques, but how to integrate innovation without losing tradition. Every student becomes a bridge builder." They moved to the barn, where the morning class was gathering. Young faces looked up expectantly, hoping for news about the program's future. Sarah and Jack shared a glance. Years of farming wisdom meeting corporate strategy in a moment of perfect understanding. "Tell them," Jack said softly. Sarah set her plans on the teaching podium next to his father's old farming journal. "We've been looking at this all wrong," she began. "It's not about preserving the past or racing toward the future. It's about learning to walk between worlds." As she outlined their renewed vision, Jack watched their students' expressions change from uncertainty to excitement. This was what had been missing, not just the technical integration, but the larger purpose behind it. "The board still has to approve," Sarah admitted later as they walked the fields together. "But this time, we're not asking permission to experiment. We're showing them a new way forward." Jack picked up a handful of soil, rich with promise. "And if they say no?" Sarah's smile held equal parts corporate determination and farmland grit. "Then we find another way. Some things are worth fighting for." The morning sun cast their shadows across the field, corporate CEO and Kansas farmer standing together in the space between worlds they'd learned to bridge. The first success check arrived on a crisp autumn morning, its amount exceeding even their optimistic projections. But it wasn't the number that made Sarah smile. It was the note from the board acknowledging that the Harrison-Wellington agricultural innovation model was showing promising results across multiple metrics. "They're actually using our name for it," she said, showing Jack the document as they walked through fields heavy with their first full harvest under the integrated system. Not the experiment or the pilot program. They're starting to see it as a real methodology. The morning sun gilded the wheat fields, where traditional plantings, guided by generations of farming wisdom, now worked in harmony with soil sensors and automated irrigation. Students moved through the rows, learning to read both the land and the data it produced. Look at this yield analysis, Jack said, pulling up readings on his tablet, another sign of how much things had changed. The heritage wheat strains are showing better drought resistance than the engineered varieties, especially when managed with the combined approach. Their success was about more than just crop yields. The education program had a waiting list, 3 years long, with interest from both young farmers and established agricultural programs. The barn-turned classroom hosted daily video conferences with farms across the country, sharing the methods they'd developed. Remember when you crashed in that field? Jack nodded toward the spot where their story had begun. If you'd been just a few degrees off course. It wasn't chance, Sarah replied, her corporate confidence softened by a farmer's connection to the land. Some things are meant to find each other. They paused to watch Ellen Thompson leading a group of students through a soil analysis session. She had withdrawn her resignation and now headed their traditional methods department, helping document generations of farming knowledge into teachable principles. The board wants to implement the model at 5 more farms by next spring, Sarah said. But they want to do it right. Full partnerships, not corporate takeovers. They're finally understanding that the human element isn't a liability, it's the key. The morning's data readings scrolled across Jack's tablet, showing the subtle harmony they'd achieved between innovation and tradition. Each sensor reading was paired with traditional farming indicators, cloud patterns, wind direction, the behavior of local wildlife. Together they painted a picture of agricultural wisdom evolved for a new era. We're getting inquiries from small farms in 3 countries, Sarah continued. They've seen what we're doing here and want to learn. The board is talking about establishing a global education network, with Harrison Farm as the flagship campus. Jack thought about his father's words in the farm journal. The land never betrays those who love it. Now they were proving that love could take many forms, from calloused hands working soil to sophisticated sensors monitoring crop health, from ancient weather wisdom to satellite data analysis. The success check represented more than profit. It validated their vision of bridging worlds, proving that preservation and progress could do more than coexist. They could create something greater together. A group of corporate executives was scheduled to visit next week, not to evaluate or judge, but to learn. They would sit in the same classroom where Jack's grandfather had taught him to read weather signs, now equipped with both traditional farming tools and advanced technology. I had my assistant pull the Polaroids from that first morning, Sarah said as they headed back to the farmhouse, going to show them how it all started, one person seeing possibility where others saw failure. One person? Jack raised an eyebrow. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across fields that had witnessed their whole journey. Okay, 2 people, finding a way forward by looking both ways. Inside the farmhouse, the morning's profits were already being reinvested in upgraded equipment that respected traditional methods, in expanded education programs, in research to further refine their integrated approach. The check itself would be framed not for the amount but for what it represented, proof that bridging worlds wasn't just possible, it was profitable. But the real profit was in the less tangible harvests, the knowledge being preserved and evolved, the communities being rebuilt, the hope being restored to family farms across the country. They were harvesting more than crops, they were harvesting possibility. The engagement ring caught the morning light as Sarah turned it on her finger, its unique design telling the story of their journey. The band was crafted from both her grandmother's ring and metal from Jack's great-grandfather's first tractor, a perfect metaphor for their union of old and new, tradition and innovation. My board nearly had a collective heart attack, Sarah said, sharing morning coffee with Jack on the farmhouse porch. The CEO of Wellington Industries getting engaged to a Kansas farmer. The press is having a field day. Former Kansas farmer, Jack corrected with a smile. Current Director of Agricultural Innovation and Heritage Preservation. The fancy title had been Sarah's idea, a way to formalize Jack's role in what was becoming a global movement. Harrison Farm was now the centerpiece of an international network of agricultural education centers, each one implementing their integrated approach to farming. "Speaking of preservation," Sarah said, pulling out her tablet, "wait until you see the latest data from the Australian partnership. They're using indigenous farming techniques combined with our sensor technology. The results are incredible." Jack moved to look over her shoulder, their easy intimacy a reflection of how completely their worlds had merged. The porch where they sat was the same, but the view had changed. Beyond the traditional fields, a modern classroom complex rose from what had once been failing wheatland. Solar panels gleamed alongside restored vintage farm equipment, each with its own purpose in their integrated approach. "Remember when you thought I was just another stranded pilot?" Sarah teased, setting aside the tablet to enjoy the moment. "Remember when you thought this was just another failing farm?" Jack countered, taking her hand. The morning buzzed with activity. Students arrived for early classes, their vehicles ranging from muddy pickup trucks to electric cars. Ellen Thompson's voice carried from the new classroom building, where she was teaching traditional weather reading alongside meteorological technology. "Your father would be proud," Sarah said softly, knowing how much the thought meant to Jack. "We're not just preserving his legacy, we're growing it." As if in response, Jack's father's pocket watch ticked steadily in his pocket. He'd taken to wearing it more often now, its ancient rhythm a reminder of the timeless principles that guided their work. A small private plane circled overhead, not crashing this time, but bringing another group of international agricultural students to learn their methods. The sight brought a shared smile to their faces. "The board wants us to consider franchising the model," Sarah said, returning to business matters. "But I told them it doesn't work that way. Each farm has to find its own balance, its own way of bridging the gap between tradition and technology." "That's what makes it work," Jack agreed. "We're not selling a system, we're teaching a philosophy. Every farm, every community has to make it their own." Inside the farmhouse, their personal and professional lives had blended as seamlessly as their agricultural methods. Corporate reports shared space with farming almanacs, high-tech tablets next to handwritten journals. Sarah had finally fully moved in, her corporate wardrobe hanging beside work clothes, her world-class coffee maker permanently at home in the kitchen. "The Wellington Harrison Agricultural Trust is officially approved," Sarah announced, pulling up the confirmation email. "Starting next month, we'll be able to provide grants to family farms looking to implement the integrated model." The trust had been her engagement gift to Jack, a way to ensure their work would continue to grow and evolve. It would help other farmers bridge the same gap they had, finding their own way to balance tradition with progress. "I think it's time," Jack said after a moment of comfortable silence. Sarah knew immediately what he meant. They had discussed it several times, always waiting for the right moment. "Are you sure?" Jack nodded, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a set of blueprints, plans for expanding the original farmhouse while preserving its historic character. Just as they had done with the farm itself, they would find a way to grow while honoring the past. "Besides," he added with a smile, "we'll need the space. Ellen says next year's student enrollment is double what we expected." Sarah leaned into him, their bodies fitting together as naturally as their two worlds had. Around them, Harrison Farm hummed with the energy of innovation and tradition working in harmony. In the distance, another group of students gathered around a field sensor station, learning to combine digital readings with time-tested farming wisdom. "You know," Sarah said, "when I first crashed here, I thought I was going to save this farm. And instead," she smiled, squeezing his hand, "instead it saved us both." The new farm sign caught the morning sunlight. Harrison Wellington Farms, where tradition meets tomorrow. 1 year after their engagement, it stood as a testament to how far they'd come and where they were heading. Sarah adjusted her wedding ring as she waited for the morning's video conference to begin. The farmhouse office, once a simple space for calculating crop yields, now connected them to agricultural innovators worldwide. Today's call would link farmers from 3 continents, all implementing variations of what had become known as the Harrison-Wellington method. "Ready?" Jack asked, entering with 2 cups of coffee, one in his mother's old ceramic mug, the other in a sleek travel tumbler. Like everything else about their life together, it was a perfect blend of their 2 worlds. The conference began, and Sarah watched with pride as Jack led the discussion. The once struggling farmer had become an eloquent advocate for agricultural evolution, teaching others how to preserve their heritage while embracing change. His practical wisdom, combined with her corporate expertise, had created something neither could have achieved alone. "We're seeing remarkable results from the latest integrated systems," a farmer from New Zealand reported. "The combination of traditional Maori farming practices with modern technology is outperforming all projections." Similar success stories poured in from around the globe. Each farm had adapted the Harrison-Wellington principles to their unique circumstances, creating a network of innovation that honored local traditions while pushing agricultural boundaries. After the call, Sarah and Jack walked their expanded property. The original farmland remained the heart of their operation, but now it was surrounded by teaching fields, research plots, and demonstration areas. Students worked alongside experienced farmers, learning to read both digital sensors and weather patterns that had guided generations before them. "Look what came in the mail," Sarah said, pulling out a magazine. Their story was on the cover, but it wasn't a business publication or an agricultural journal. It was a wedding announcement, featuring them standing in their wheat fields at sunset. The headline read, "Love Grows, How a Crashed Plane Led to Agricultural Revolution." "Ellen will love that," Jack laughed, referring to their head of traditional methods, who had been their biggest supporter and had officiated their wedding ceremony right here on the farm. They paused by the spot where Sarah's plane had crashed 2 years ago. The field now grew an experimental crop of drought-resistant wheat, developed by combining heritage seeds with modern genetics. Like their relationship, it was stronger for its mixed ancestry. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. A new group of students was arriving for the term, their faces eager to learn the art and science of modern farming. Among them were children of corporate farmers and 5th-generation family farmers, all seeking the same thing, a way forward that didn't require leaving the past behind. "Sometimes I wonder," Sarah mused, watching the young arrivals, "what would have happened if I'd landed safely that night? If I'd just flown over another failing farm in Kansas?" Jack squeezed her hand. "You would have found your way here eventually." "Some things are meant to be." A young woman approached them, tablet in hand, but wearing mud-spattered boots. "Mr. Harrison, Miss Wellington." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison-Wellington. We're ready for the morning session on integrated pest management." They shared a smile at the name Confusion. They'd kept both names professionally, another bridge between their worlds. "We'll be right there," Sarah assured her. As they walked toward the classroom complex, they passed under the new sign again. It wasn't just a farm name anymore. It was a philosophy that was spreading across the globe, helping other farmers find their own way to bridge tradition and progress. "You know what my father used to say about the land," Jack said, as they reached the classroom. Sarah smiled. "That? It never betrays those who love it." "He was right," Jack nodded. "He just didn't know how many different ways there were to love it." They entered the classroom together, ready to share their story once again. Around them, Harrison Farm hummed with the energy of past and future working in harmony, a living testament to the power of seeing possibility where others saw only endings. Some crops, after all, take time to reach their full harvest, but with patience, dedication, and the courage to bridge different worlds, even the most unlikely seeds can grow into something extraordinary.